Between last night's speech spectacle and the Russian heel turn in the Oval Office, it's been a typically upsetting week in Trump's America. While Trump spun quite a fantastical yarn about tariffs, Ravi is going to take us through some actual real life economic indicators. Stick around to the end when we'll be joined by a retired American veteran who's been active on the ground in Ukraine. You don't want to miss what my friend Kurt Warner has to say. Welcome back to the podcast for the 54% of Americans who regularly vote for progress in every election and want to convince their friends and family members to join our majority. This is Majority 54.
Jason, well, of all people, Brit Hume on Fox News, I think best summarized the speech that we all saw last night. Let's go to the clip.
This was the most boisterous, the longest, the most partisan speech I've ever heard a president give in this kind of setting, and I go back about maybe 50 years on this.
An hour and 40 minutes, Jason.
Man, when I was in the Army, we had a rule. Like, after I deployed and stuff, I became a training officer and taught like combat leadership skills. So most of the time we were in the field, but sometimes we had to be in the classroom. And there's actually an Army doctrinal sort of rule that says you cannot have instruction for longer than 55 minutes. So after 55 minutes, you got to have everybody stand up and walk around because nobody can concentrate for more than 55 consecutive minutes. And I've always kind of kept that in mind when it came to speaking, and I think he blew way past that.
Yeah, I think the top line message that they wanted us to take away is that they have swift, unrelenting action. And so let's take that seriously for a second, because I don't want to fall into this old pattern where every time we see Trump do something like before the election, we're just like, oh, let's laugh at how stupid he is. Mm-hmm. We'll get to that part of the pod for sure. If you're looking for that, there's plenty in an hour and 40-minute speech to deliver on that. But I've been seeing all over my social media from like Democrats, independents, a lot of like definitely super progressive Democrats, this meme out there that, hey, I don't agree with what Trump's doing, but at least he's getting things done. Biden never, why didn't Biden do all these things? And I've been thinking about this a lot. And I think how to handle that claim is going to be something like we're going to have to deal with that, because that claim almost presumes, number one, that Trump is quote unquote doing more than Biden. Two is that like in some ways that's admirable, right? And that's on our side, which makes me wonder if that's what people on our side are saying, then maybe independents and right-leaning and right-wing voters have their own version of this, which is, hey, I don't agree with all this, but he's doing things, and that's certainly the message they wanted to show in that speech last night.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think it's really important to remember that the Biden administration's over. So if someone brings you into a conversation where they're comparing Trump to Biden, you're losing, because what you're doing is you can change the past anymore however you want in a conversation, in the news, and people can reimagine that however they like, and you can't really compete with that theater of the mind. So I wouldn't do that. I would work to try and compare Trump to the future alternative, to the current alternative. And look, we know that Biden's numbers on the way out were just not very good. So why would you continue to put yourself in a position where you have to defend a difficult to defend position? But yes, I think that is clearly their strategy, and it's very effective, frankly, because what's one of the biggest complaints that people have about Washington? One of the biggest complaints is that everybody fights and nothing ever gets done. And there is certainly an element out there of people who are like, well, at least something is happening. At least they're doing something, even if it's stuff you don't necessarily agree with, which is why we have to work extra hard to demonstrate that what they're doing is really bad.
Yeah, and I think the way to handle this, and we'll talk more about the Democratic response, because I actually think in the prominent Democratic responses, it seems like they get this message, is put Biden aside, like you say, and then hold Trump to his promises to the voters, right? What did voters really vote Trump in on? You talk to anybody, they're going to smuggle their pet projects. Is it trans issues? Is it this? Is it that? It was overwhelmingly the economy, right? Everybody has their own reasons for voting, but it was the economy and it was inflation.
It's certainly when it comes to the persuadable voters.
Yeah.
There were not a lot of persuadable voters who were persuaded because of trans issues, right? Maybe
Right.
some, but not that many. At the end of the day, the voters that are up for grabs for next time, most of them were probably ultimately persuaded by the economy.
And so that's where we start here, right? That is that is where we begin, ladies and gentlemen, is on the economy, and perhaps is where the story ends, because there, as we'll get to here, there's a lot of bad economic data for Trump, and he's going to do his very best. And even in the speech, he tried to blame Biden multiple times, and that's the job here, right? The job of the Democratic opposition is to hold Trump to his standard that he laid out to the electorate on the economy. There's a lot of other things. We're going to talk about Ukraine. We're going to talk about USAID. All this kind of stuff is important, but with the very limited megaphone we have to constantly bring it back to that promise, because he is not delivering on that, and there are storm clouds on the horizon. So with that said, let's look at a couple weird moments here. One that I just thought was fascinating was when he gave a sort of shout out to Marco Rubio. Let's go to this clip.
And we have Marco Rubio in charge. Good luck, Marco. Now, we know who to blame if anything goes wrong. Marco's been amazing, and he's going to do a great job. Think of it. He got 100 votes.
We'll come back to Marco, Jason, later in this podcast when we talk about Ukraine. Let's go to a second clip that's more to the point of the economic story that I was talking about. Trump seems to have a sense out there that like things could be going south economically, and because of his tariffs, and seems to try to be taking a little bit of rhetorical prophylactic measures here. Here's just one small example of this.
They're about protecting the soul of our country. Tariffs are about making America rich again and making America great again, and it's happening, and it will happen rather quickly. There'll be a little disturbance, but we're okay with that. It won't be much. No, you're not. Oh.
What did the person say that he said?
No, you're not. I think it was a Democrat saying, are we okay with a little disturbance? No, we're not.
Ah, I see. Yeah. Yeah. What's interesting about that is you can tell that that part was not in the prepared remarks by the way he said it, right? A little disturbance, all that kind of stuff. I mean, also because it's his like tick. The other thing that wasn't in the prepared remarks, I don't think, was him saying it'll happen very quickly. So he goes off book, right? And he goes, it'll happen very quickly. And then he goes, oh crap, in his head. And he says, there'll be a little disturbance, but we're okay with that. And it's like, yeah, he is aware that a lot of people are saying, as he likes to say, that prices are going up and that prices are going to go up even more. And he's definitely trying to get out in front of it. I do think this is something we should pounce all over.
Yeah, and actually we had in this outline this moment where Representative Al Green was kicked out, and actually I think we should skip it, and let me give you my rationale for this. I think it was like a notable moment, but I think it's actually, I was listening to James Carville talk to Tim Miller yesterday about this, and he was anticipating these types of moments where there's like disturbance in the chamber and whether Democrats should like create spectacle or not. And like, look, people can interpret what Representative Green was doing one way or the other. But I think that's on Trump's territory here. That's the kind of spectacle he likes, that WrestleMania style. Whereas I actually think what he doesn't want us talking about is what some of the Democratic representatives and senators and governors have been saying about the economy. And let's start with, actually, this was a Meidas interview. They sent their...
Hold on, before we do that, let's go deeper into what you just mentioned, because I haven't figured out what I think about that, whether or not, because look, the holding up a sign that says it's not normal, and an older gentleman shaking his cane, like literally just shaking his cane in disgust at Trump. Part of me wants to say, look, this isn't doing anything to persuade voters, right? And then another part of me says, well, at some point you have to show your people that you're fighting. You have to get your side to care. That's how you get people to give. That's how you get people to give time. It's how, and then another part of me thinks about the fact that, and then I say, like, yeah, but people don't care about this, and it just makes us look small and everything. And I don't really know where to come out on it, because the other side to this is that for as bad as Republicans behaved when Obama was president, when Biden was president, like in decorum settings like this, I'm trying to think of a time when they suffered for it electorally. And I just don't think they ever did. I think that the only time, it seems to me, that in Washington politics, that in the dynamic between parties, that one party really suffers for the sort of not like, I don't know how you would put it, like uncivilized behavior, is when that party is president. I really think the only time you really suffer for it is like, I think Trump has the ability to suffer for being a jerk. Like it does turn some people off. I think that when Biden wouldn't do things like answer questions, I think it turned people off. When Biden appeared, not up for the job, it turned, stuff like that. But I just think for whatever reason, we seem to be past Americans assigning much blame to the party out of power for anything they do. And I wonder if it is to our benefit to just go against the whole swift and effective thing by demonstrating that there is a lot of chaos that he is not managing.
Yeah, I think so. If it is framed like you just talked about it, like if we got in a room with Democratic leaders and representatives and like, look, here's our strategy. Trump just had this chaotic Oval Office meeting that no matter what you think would give the average American the heebie-jeebies just thinking about like, this doesn't feel like very thoughtful and organized. Right. And so if the theory is, hey, at every turn, we're going to push the message of chaos, then I would be susceptible to an argument that what Representative Green was doing is helpful. And again, I'm not mad at Representative Green. I'm just saying,
I think he was being genuine, by the way.
Yeah, and it's like to me, I'm like, it's a matter of like emphasis, right? It's like, all right, whatever he's doing, like I'm not mad. I just am like, are we like, what is the top line message and emphasis that we want to make to the voters? And is it a matter of sequencing, right? To Carville's point, he was, we talked about this last week. He's advocating for the strategic pause. I've been thinking about this a lot lately. I'm not fully sold on the big pause, but I do think in certain ways, the matter of sequencing matters. And like, let's fast forward a year and a half to when we're heading into the midterm elections, or 2 years. And Trump is making big speeches like this, and the economy has turned south.
Mm-hmm.
And there's more chaos. Then I'm like, all right, let's really turn it up, Spinal Tap style, and let's use all that energy. Cause like, look, our people want to see us fight now, of course, and important, but most importantly, we need to give everybody like either a breather or a sense of time to catch up to everything so that we get their very best in 2 years or a year and a half. And then we get their very, very best heading into 2028, if you know what I'm saying.
I agree. I just think for all the people you were talking earlier about all the people who are saying like, well, he is getting stuff done. There's also this whole other group that I'm sure you're hearing from, that I'm definitely hearing from on social media, like in direct messages and in replies. And that is like, why aren't Democrats doing anything? And, the rational answer is, well, we have no power. The honest answer is Democrats in Congress, the Republicans have the White House, the Supreme Court, and both houses of Congress. That's the honest answer to it.
Yeah.
But that's not an acceptable answer. And so there is a pent up, like, give us there's a sense of like, show us that you're trying, show us that this isn't over with. And I'm not saying that, an older member of Congress standing up and shaking his cane in disgust at the president, in a way that when Joe Wilson did it to Obama and when Marjorie Taylor Greene did it to Biden, we definitely looked down upon, and we definitely said it was wrong. I'm not saying that does it, and I'm not saying I have the answer, but I do just want to say, like, there are, even at this early stage, like, you've got to show people passion so that they know they're not alone in feeling scared and worried.
Yeah, I think like where I am is like try to fast forward. Like in the grand scheme of things, it's a matter of emphasis. Everything everybody was talking about in my life, I'm getting texts, is about this moment where I'm like, well, a year or two from now, what are we going to be talking about? Well, we're going to probably be talking about the trajectory of the economy and whether the Democrats from the outset set up the debate properly so that we can actually message properly to the American people. And on that account, I have very high scores for the Democrats that I've seen here. So let's start with Eric Swalwell, who was interviewed by Meidas last night, and he had a line that I really loved.
What do you say to Americans who voted for Trump because they wanted lower prices, but now they've only seen him start trade wars with our allies?
If you wanted lower prices and you were promised that on day one, well, the stock market is crashing and prices are rising. So, this guy, he's gone to the Super Bowl, he's gone to the Daytona 500, he's gone to a UFC fight. You should go to the fucking supermarket and look at what people are spending to feed themselves, because that's where they want them to go, and you won't go there.
Yeah, let me tell you, people have different opinions about Eric Swalwell.
Yeah, I have many.
Yeah.
I'm trying to be nice to him today.
I know Eric decently well. You probably do too. Eric, I don't remember where in California he represents. And obviously, the guy does a lot of things. He comes from a very safe district and he does things that obviously play well in that district. But he also has a unique ability to talk to the whole country, because people forget the dude grew up in Iowa. And so, like, maybe in Iowa, a politician's not going to drop that F-bomb, but if they're standing around in a diner and they're talking to people about politics, that's exactly how you're going to say it if you want to be effective. And I give him credit for that.
Yeah, and here's Alyssa Slotkin.
Look, the president talked a big game on the economy, but it's always important to read the fine print. So, do his plans actually help Americans get ahead? Not even close. President Trump is trying to deliver an unprecedented giveaway to his billionaire friends. He's on the hunt to find trillions of dollars to pass along to the wealthiest in America. And to do that, he's going to make you pay in every part of your life. Grocery and home prices are going up, not down, and he hasn't laid out a credible plan to deal with either of those. His tariffs on allies like Canada will raise prices on energy, lumber, and cars, and start a trade war that will hurt manufacturing and farmers. Your premiums and prescriptions will cost more because the math on his proposals doesn't work without going after your health care. Meanwhile, for those keeping score, the national debt is going up, not down. And if he's not careful, he could walk us right into a recession. And one more thing. In order to pay for his plan, he could very well come after your retirement, the Social Security, Medicare, and VA benefits you worked your whole life to earn. The president claims he won't, but Elon Musk just called Social Security the biggest Ponzi scheme of all time.
First of all, I always applaud any response coming in an upper Midwest accent. I think that's exactly the part of the country we need to focus on, and Alyssa Slotkin brings that, and I'm all for it.
Well, I just want to point out, you had Swalwell in his own way making a point. You had Slotkin making a point. And now you have Governor Pritzker in Illinois. Let's watch him making a similar point in his own way.
Donald Trump is lying to you. Here's the truth. It's simple. Tariffs are a tax on Americans. When you buy something, you pay the tariff, not some foreign country. Trump's tariffs will raise the price on things like tomatoes and prescription medicines, electronics, toys, and more. Grocery prices are rising because of Trump's tax. New car prices are rising because of Trump's tax. Beer prices are rising because of Trump's tax. And he has no plan for what happens next. He doesn't care about the farmer who relies on machinery from Canada to operate their farm, or the small business owner who needs supplies from Europe, or the parents who need to feed their families every day at a reasonable cost. While Trump is causing higher prices in Illinois, lowering the burden on working families is what we're all about. We've eliminated the grocery tax and raised the minimum wage. We lowered income taxes on workers and erased medical debt for nearly 300,000 Illinoisans, with more to come. And while we can't combat every part of Trump's tax, it's a start. Protecting Illinoisans from the economic hardship Trump is imposing is one of my most important missions as your governor.
I just love this, man. Everybody's saying singing from the same sheet. We don't have big megaphones. Like, let's, like Slotkin on C-SPAN or being excerpted on MSNBC is not going to win the day. But if everybody is saying the same thing and it's about the core promise that Trump made that he is reneging on, that's why we get out of this mess. You know,
If you think about the the arguments that were the most effective against Biden and ultimately then against Harris, but basically were both against Biden that Harris had to own. One was inflation, and they started making that argument before, like at the very beginning, and it was when Biden was trying to climb out of the COVID hole, and he was spending a lot of government money. You can argue whether or not that was the primary reason that inflation was as bad as it was, or whether it was just supply chain issues coming out of COVID. But it's academic, because the point is they signposted from the beginning. The Republicans, before it really got as bad as it got, and then it started to get better, but by then it was too late, they were saying this is going to cause this kind of inflation. This is going to be the reason prices are high. And they were saying it before it became true, whether causality or not, the prices became high. And then people said, well, I guess that's why. The other thing that happened that was really devastating to Biden was the Afghanistan pullout, right? Because that went right at the heart of the argument that Biden had for electing him in the first place, which is competency, knows what he's doing, been around a long time, not the kind of chaos that you had under the first Trump administration. And when you combine those two things, I think ultimately that those are the largest reasons why we lost the election. So I totally agree. If you can get on the same sheet of music from the beginning, and you happen to be, I think, making the correct argument, which is this is going to cause these economic problems, then you're not just assigning that blame after the fact. Then you can look back and say, see, we tried to tell you. But it also lends itself to highlighting the chaos, and even at times leaning into it, and as long as it's in a way that's not detrimental to the country, because that's the two things that really brought Trump down in the first place. The chaotic nature of the first Trump administration, and the economy collapsing because of COVID, or, and the chaos. I would just put the pandemic that killed so many people into the chaos.
yeah.
So yeah, I think you're right.
It also has the benefit of focusing Democrats on the parts of their agenda and their arguments that are most popular.
And unite us the most.
Unite us, right? And I think it pulls us away from, shall I say, niche issues that sometimes can dominate our discourse, and really puts us right at that kitchen table.
Well, let's even before we go on, though, let's also talk about those two specific responses, Slotkin and Pritzker, that we played here. They stand out to me because, your standard responses to a presidential congressional address, we've talked about this before. They usually are pretty flat.
Yeah.
And we've talked before about like how we would do it. And I've always said that like I would sit and actually take notes during the speech. And then I would do something, extemporaneous, because I think people are more likely to listen if they think, oh, who knows what this person's going to say. And if it comes across more genuine.
Yes.
I actually think both of these were the exception to that. I think now, the second half of that Pritzker clip is,
neither of them are like riveting, but I think it gives us messages we can take and be off the cuff with.
And that's the thing, is also they did them in really accessible ways. There weren't a lot of like policy buzzwords in there, right? I mean, he's talking about tomatoes and beer and she's talking about lumber, and like they're telling you exactly what is going to cost more. I mean, they're telling you exactly, and that's what Democrats have always struggled with the most, is being able to take our sort of high-minded theoretical ideas and illustrate them and turn them into something that anybody can understand how it affects their life, and that is extremely effective.
Yeah, I think like our job, because we don't have a nominee for a while, right? And before you get a nominee, I think of it, the job of the party should be to win the material arguments, right? Like, what are people's lives better or worse? Do we need change or not change? And then that creates the opening for somebody to win the immaterial arguments about like the character of the nation and what's my bio and can I inspire you and can I scare you about them, right? That's where like a good candidate steps in. But they need the framework to be like, are things better off today than they were before? Like, have we done our job to get past the baton to whoever that is? Stephen A. Smith, Mark Cuban, whoever.
Well, but you know what? A big part of that is the other thing you see as a transition in this messaging, which is it's not about Trump's character. Because look, I know people are scared about this not being the case, but you should operate as it is, that Trump can't run again. And by the way, I would remind anybody that if if there is a world in which Trump can run for a third term, his opponent can be Barack Obama. So everybody should just
Right.
just relax about that possibility if it ever comes to fruition. It won't, but if it ever did, like, Obama will whoop his ass. So okay, given that he can't run again, what you see Pritzker and Slotkin doing there is they're not talking about, we have a felon in the White House. They're not talking about any of those things. He's not the issue anymore. It's what he wants to do, what he is doing that's the issue. And as we said last week, if you want an individual to make the issue, it's Elon Musk, because Elon Musk is going to be right at the center of the next presidential campaign, because if he hadn't been born in South Africa, he'd be running. But he can't. So he's going to want to own whoever the next Republican nominee is. And so I do think that from a main character, like antagonist character, I think we're doing right by transitioning to the person who seems to be doing all the bad.
Yeah, and I'm here in New Orleans where we had Mardi Gras yesterday, and as part of the parade that I was watching, they had cyber trucks. And they're, basically people are partying, whatever. The cyber trucks come, people are pelting it. United the crowd. Let's take a break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about tariffs. We're going to talk about crypto grift, and then we're going to talk about Ukraine when we come back. When your car breaks down, you take it to a mechanic with no hesitation. You need it, and it's not something that you could fix yourself. And men should think the exact same way about ED. But the reality is that you might be hesitant to seek help. Thankfully, through HIMS, you can get access to personalized ED treatment without stepping outside your door. HIMS is changing men's healthcare by providing you with access to affordable sexual health treatment from the comfort of your couch. And HIMS provides access to a range of doctor-trusted ED treatments like chewable hard mints and Viagra and Cialis and their generics for up to 95% cheaper. The process is 100% online, so there's no need for the uncomfortable doctor's visits. Just answer a series of questions on their site, and a medical provider will determine the right treatment option. If prescribed, your medication ships directly to you for free. And no insurance is needed. One low price covers everything from treatments to ongoing care. And with hundreds of thousands of trusted subscribers, HIMS can help you find the ED option that works for you. Start your free online visit today at hims.com/majority. That's HIMS.com/majority for your personalized ED treatment options. hims.com/majority. The products mentioned are chewable, compounded products which are not provided or not approved by or verified for safety or effectiveness by the FDA. Prescriptions require an online consultation with a healthcare provider who will determine if appropriate. Restrictions apply. See website for details and important safety information. Subscription required. Price varies based on product and subscription plan. All right, fast developing story here is this tariff question. And we don't need to go into the details here, but Trump announced that he was moving forward yesterday with a series of tariffs on Canada, Mexico, and China. And
Yep, Ravi, we just lost your audio. Here, I'll walk through it.
Oops, sorry.
There you are. You're back.
Sorry about that. The reaction was swift to these tariffs. So, and we'll talk a little bit about where we stand, because as we're recording, it's Wednesday afternoon, and there's a lot of news coming out now where it looks like they're going to do a 1-month pause on the car tariffs for Mexico and China, Mexico and Canada. But Trudeau had a pretty barbed response to this. Let's go to this clip.
This is a trade war, yes. But Canadians are hurt. Canadians are angry. We're going to choose to not go on vacation in Florida or Old Orchard Beach or wherever. We're going to choose to try to buy Canadian products and forego bourbon and other classic American products. And yeah, we're probably going to keep booing the American anthem. But let me tell Americans, we're not booing you. We're not booing your teams. We're not booing your players. We're booing a policy that is designed to hurt us. And we're insulted. And we're angry. But we're Canadian, which means we're going to stand up for each other. We're going to fight. And we're going to win.
It's so strange. I mean, I can't believe we're in any kind of fight with Canada. I mean, Robin Williams famously said that Canada was a really nice apartment over a great party, and and it's like,
Which is actually how I would describe my time in New Orleans. Actually, I literally have a very nice apartment in the French Quarter above a lot of parties that I wasn't partaking in over the past couple of weeks.
Yeah. Anyway, I don't know. I don't know how many Americans will even see that. It's also interesting, you know, we've talked about this on our other show, that Trudeau is very unpopular right now in Canada, which probably has to do with a lot of things, one of which is he's been there an awful long time. And so it is interesting that people are in a position where they're like, okay, I don't like Trump, and yet I'm also for the Conservative Party right now in Canada. Like, they're able to hold both things in their minds, which is interesting, that they are leaning toward the Conservative Party, and they think that the conservative leader of America is the villain. It's interesting that they're able to do that.
Right. You know, Trump's playing with fire here for a lot of reasons, not because he's offending Canada, although I think Americans will take notice at all these sporting events and just interacting with Canadians when people are just so pissed. And no one of these things is going to, you know, break the camel's back, so to speak. But you put this together with animus coming from European allies, to animus coming from some Eastern European allies like Ukraine, and you start to go down the list and you're like, okay, at a certain point, no one meme of the Gaza Strip turned into a Trump hotel or a belittling comment about Greenland or the Panama Canal or Canada is going to change the minds of Americans. But if the economy is doing poorly and other people are pissed and the world seems chaotic and everybody seems mad at us because of our president, it all layers into the same narrative. And it's not just lefties making these arguments. And, you know, back to the material world, you know, Steve Cohen, who I think was originally a Trump supporter, he supported Trump's, I think, first bid, but hasn't been since. He's the owner of the Mets, big hedge fund manager, kind of loosely who they based the Billions character that Damian Lewis plays on Billions off of. He sounded some alarm bells about how he thinks this economy is going and the role tariffs and Doge are playing here. Let's go to this clip.
This is one of those moments where there's really a lot of uncertainty, and I have pretty strong views here. When you take a brew of tariffs, I mean, tariffs cannot be positive, okay? I mean, it's a tax. And you can imagine tit for tat if the U.S. does something, implements a tax on somebody, somebody else is going to, you know, perhaps raise the stakes and raise their tax back. So taxes are never positive. On top of that, we have slowing immigration, which means the labor force will not grow as rapidly as previous over the last, say, 5 years. And in addition, now you have Doge, right? And you know, wherever you lay on the Doge issue, I mean, that's austerity. And austerity, you know, when that money's been coursing through the economy over many years, and now potentially will be reduced or stopped in many ways, has got to be negative for the economy. So you have tariffs, I mean, I could see a situation where we think growth is going to slow to 1.5% from 2.5% in the second half, and yet the unemployment rate is actually going to go down, which because of slowing labor force. And so, I mean, there may be offsets in Doge, and that needs to be considered. But the reality is you've got a brew of sticky inflation, slowing growth, and austerity in the government. And so I'm actually pretty negative for the first time in a while. I don't think it's going to be a disaster, but I do think, given where investors lay, how committed they are to the markets today, that I think we're seeing a regime shift a little bit. and it may only last a year or so, but it's definitely a period where I think the best gains have been had, and wouldn't surprise me to see a significant correction.
I mean, it makes a lot of sense, and they're not going to listen to him. What's so fascinating to me is everything he just said is classically Republican. Nothing he said is like, you're not like, oh, what a liberal. Like, I suppose maybe
The austerity,
piece, is sort of like, because he's like, but all he's just saying austerity doesn't grow the economy, is all he's saying, which isn't a particularly partisan statement one way or the other. So what this makes me think of is Trump has come in, and it's his second time around, and there's a lot of fear, and rightfully so, because it's like, well, now his people know how to work the levers of government much better, and he's doesn't have to run again. So as a result, he's unshackled. And that's all true. And it's all reasons to be very concerned about what happens. From a strictly political standpoint, it is a really dangerous place for the other Republicans to be in, because they have latched themselves now full. I mean, Trump's now won twice. Every Republican elected official left standing that's still elected is like, go big or go home, ride or die with this guy. We're all in. I mean, when you see Trump in that clip we played earlier talking about tariffs, and you've got Speaker Johnson behind him nodding like he's passionately agreed or believed in tariffs his entire life, when he's a pretty normal Republican, there's no way he has. He's a new convert to it. What it all means is there's no alignment between their political interests and Trump's. Their political interests, even J.D. Vance, who wants to be the next president, their interest is in having policies that by 2028 are very popular. Trump doesn't have that motivation. He doesn't have that incentive. And the reason that he's doing things so differently or so much more aggressively than last time is not necessarily just this is his second time around or he's unshackled. It's that he doesn't got to run again. So he don't care. Trump has never cared what happens after him, ever. And he is leading them off a dangerous deep end, and they're just going right along with it.
Well, this might put your jaw on the floor, but here's an argument that's starting to be mainstreamed on the right now, which tells you a sense of where they think things are heading. And listeners, you may start to hear this argument, which is a recession is good. Okay. Have you heard this yet?
No, but it doesn't surprise me.
So why is a recession good, and why is it good politics for them? And so they're arguing both of these
hold
things.
On. Is this a recession is good? We're going to genuinely believe this, or is this let's get out in front of this recession?
Well, okay, there's a certain species of the right now, which I would say J.D. Vance is kind of like this, Mark Andreessen is like this, and Chamath Palihapitiya, who's the person I heard making this argument most recently, is certainly this creature, which is Silicon Valley adjacent, pseudo-intellectual, speak really fast, like quote a couple books while you're making a point that is totally crazy. And so here's the argument they're making. The Trump base is young and male. And young people generally are like part of growing the Republican Party. Now, what are young people pissed about? Well, asset classes are overvalued, like houses and stocks and things like that, and really have been overvalued to the benefit of boomers and older people. Therefore, a recession in which housing prices tank, stock market tanks, that creates a course correction in those assets to make them more affordable to the younger people is both morally correct and good politics. Now, there's interesting parts of this argument where, like, if you were to corner me at any point over the past few years, I would say, look, there's got to be some pain in order to create a more accessible world for young people. That part of it, I don't think is necessarily a bad point in isolation. The problem is, in order to buy assets, Jason, whether it's a house or stocks, you need to have a job. And that's where things could get thorny here.
And if eggs and tomatoes are super expensive, you got a lot less money left over for a house.
Correct. Yeah.
Do you know who can benefit from a recession? Is young white men whose parents have money and who don't individually. So in that way, they may be right, because for their base, because if you are a young white man who, is not necessarily in a position to buy the car you want or to own your own home, but your parents have enough money to help you do it, now more of that is available to you if there's a recession, I suppose, maybe, but I think they're just, look, I remember being in the parking lot of a Hardee's in 2016 while running for the US Senate, and it was like in Cape Girardeau or somewhere. And I'm talking to guys who just got, young white men who just got off work at the Hardee's. And I'm telling them that I want to raise minimum wage. And I can hear Rush Limbaugh coming through the speakers of one of their cars that they're getting ready to get into. And these minimum wage workers looked at me and said, if minimum wage goes up, that'll cause inflation and prices will go up. So I don't want minimum wage to go up. So let's make sure we don't underestimate their ability to, get people to believe in things that are not actually good for them.
Yeah, and we, speaking of, these young males whose parents have a lot of money, we were going to talk about crypto, but I do think we have to get to Ukraine. So, what do you think? We maybe kick the crypto discussion to
Let's
next
see.
week?
We don't have Kurt here yet, so we got
Okay.
a minute, so we can.
Well,
still
let's do some quick work on the crypto side of things. So, this is a weird one, and let me just point out the obvious contradiction between the arguments that I just described on asset price deflation and accessibility. So I'll put that aside. Also worth mentioning that the crypto czar, I think David Sachs is the crypto czar or whatever advisor to this administration, is a podcast co-host with the aforementioned Chamath Palihapitiya. So this is not like a fringe group of people. They are central to the MAGA project, and don't seem to have any interest in consistency here. But this weekend, Trump announced that he's moving forward with a plan to create a strategic cryptocurrency reserve. And this is a bad idea on a number of levels, but the people who are reasonable on this issue, who I happen to disagree with, have been arguing that they should do this in Bitcoin because Bitcoin is the most stable and respectable of all the cryptocurrencies. But Trump turned heads because he included like more esoteric instruments, as they say, XRP, Solana, Cardano, and drew ire not just from people like me, but even from some crypto people who are like, hey, even I'm a little bit alarmed by this. And even some Republican leaning donors like Joe Lonsdale have been very critical of this move. Now, we don't have details at all of what this is, and there are many permutations of what this could look like. But I don't even need to begin to tell you how many people in the Trump administration, like, very obviously have huge holdings of these cryptocurrencies and stand to gain enormously from us, the taxpayers, purchasing these assets.
Yeah, I've had crypto explained to me like 500 times, and every time it's explained to me, I get it, and then it leaves my brain. But what I do understand is, and so I don't like have a pro or con position, to be honest, on crypto. But what I do understand is self-enrichment by people who are governing. And like, I don't care what kind of currency we're talking about. I generally think that's bad for the rest of us. And that is a pretty easy message.
Yeah, it's extremely volatile, right? And so like this could go up, it could go down. And we tend to have reserves of things like oil, food, cash, which you can exchange for goods, and there's a whole other monetary reason why the United States. Yeah, medicine, PPE, hopefully now, right?
Mm-hmm.
So is this the worst thing going on in this week? No, but it's I think in line with a just blatant series of corrupt acts that this administration is doing in plain sight, period.
All right, we promised we'd talk about Ukraine, and we're going to do that now. We're going to bring in Kurt Warner. Longtime listeners of this show are familiar with the work that I've done with regard to Afghan refugees and how it resulted in my founding a nonprofit called American Rescue Project. And since shortly after the founding of American Rescue Project, Executive Director Kurt Warner has led ARP, including expanding its reach dramatically. ARP assists humanitarian efforts worldwide to include Afghanistan, Ukraine, and even here at home. Kurt is a 23-year retired veteran of the U.S. Army who served in Afghanistan and Iraq, as well as Germany, Korea, and other international postings. He was an enlisted infantryman before receiving his commission as an aviation officer. He served in airborne divisions and in special operations. In and out of the military, his work has taken him to 37 countries, including multiple trips to Ukraine. And his current role with American Rescue Project, Kurt called me the other day and was just like, after the Oval Office business, and was like, I need to talk about this. Can I please come on your show? And I was like, yeah, let's do it. So Kurt, how are you feeling now?
I'm feeling about the same. In fact, I might be feeling worse because they cut off Intel today. So
yes,
we're
no longer sharing intelligence with Ukraine.
In fact, what I kind of hoped is that the news media would not have announced we're stopping all shipments of everything except Intel, because they said that, and then they were like, oh, Jesus, let's stop that too. Right? Yeah. So sometimes maybe you just keep your mouth shut. They probably would have forgotten about it. But anyway, that happened. Today.
Ravi, do you want to cue this up with a clip here?
Yeah, I think our listeners now must be somewhat familiar about what happened in the Oval Office, but let's take it in two parts. Let's start with the first part of this interaction between Zelensky and the Trump administration in the Oval Office.
This thing over with. You see the hatred he's got for Putin. It's very tough for me to make a deal with that kind of hate. He's got tremendous hatred. And I understand that, but I can tell you the other side isn't exactly in love with, him either. So it's not a question of alignment. I'm aligned with the world. I want to get the thing set. I'm aligned with Europe. I want to see if we can get this thing done. You want me to be tough? I could be tougher than any human being you've ever seen. I'd be so tough. But you're never going to get a deal that way. So that's the way it goes. All right, one more question.
Hey, I want to respond to this. So look, for 4 years in the United States of America, we had a president who stood up at press conferences and talked tough about Vladimir Putin, and then Putin invaded Ukraine and destroyed a significant chunk of the country. The path to peace and the path to prosperity is maybe engaging in diplomacy. We tried the pathway of Joe Biden of thumping our chest and pretending that the President of the United States' words mattered more than the President of the United States' actions. What makes America a good country is America engaging in diplomacy. That's what President Trump is doing.
Can I ask you?
Sure.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. So he occupied our big parts of Ukraine, part of East and Crimea. So he occupied it on 2014. So during a lot of years, so I'm not speaking about just Biden, but those time was Obama, then President Obama, then President Trump, then President Biden, now President Trump, and God bless, now President Trump will stop him. But during 2014, nobody stopped him. He just occupied and took. He killed people. You know what the contact
2015.
2014 and 2014.
2014.
Yeah. So
I was not here.
Yeah, but
that's exactly right.
Yes, but during 2014 till 2022, the situation the same. The people have been dying on the contact line. Nobody stopped him. You know that we had conversations with him, a lot of conversation, my bilateral conversation, and we signed with him, me, like a new president. In 2019, I signed with him the deal. I signed with him, Macron and Merkel, we signed ceasefire. Ceasefire. All of them told me that he will never go. We signed with him with gas contract. Yes, but after that, he broken this ceasefire. He killed our people and he didn't exchange prisoners. We signed the exchange of prisoners, but he didn't do it. What kind of diplomacy, JD, you are speaking about? What do you mean?
I'm talking about the kind of diplomacy that's going to end the destruction of your country.
Yeah.
Kurt, just talk.
Oh, well, I mean, like two vaudeville clowns slapping him around in there for some reason. Clearly, obviously, as I sat and watched it, I'm like, why is this devolving into this ambush? That it was clearly, I mean, at the end of the day, they hadn't gotten him to go down a rabbit hole for 40 minutes. So at the end of the day, you get some guy, I guess the vice president of the United States is some guy to me. And he baited him into that discussion 100%, because they didn't want to sign that deal. They don't want to have anything to do with Ukraine having any perception of actually winning this conflict. There are larger forces at play here, and that's what I saw. Like, literally just jumped off the screen at me, and I watched it over and over. I'm like, well, what could he do? I mean, there was nothing that he could have done. There's not one thing he could have said. That was going to happen from the moment he walked into that White House, at some point in the conversation. And you know, our guy that's an actor likes that it was on TV, right? He wanted it to be there, right? It had to be there for the show. That's just my opinion of it. And I don't know what, I'm not sure. I mean, Vice President Vance talking about diplomacy. It's like, I was always taught in the military that, a military force is a form of diplomacy. It's just on a spectrum. There's no, it's like you do this and then you fight a war, right? It's like there's this spectrum of things that lead up to, and it's all diplomacy, right? And I was also, looking at that, like, you may or may not have heard of the sort of reasonable person of goodwill theory about persuasion and coercion, right? So your boss can try to persuade you or coerce you. If you're a reasonable person of goodwill, you can you maybe have to do both. But if you're not a reasonable person and not of goodwill, which you could clearly see those two in that Oval Office were not, then they only have one thing. They just run right to the coercion side, which is guns and gold, right? You can get the stick out and whack somebody, or you can bribe them. Those are the two things. And I think, to President Zelensky's credit, while he fell for the trap, I think he acquitted himself really well. And I'm kind of glad that they kicked him out before he signed the deal. I think he still has a chip. I
think he, from watching it, I think he knew that he was walking into a trap, and I think that his audience was Europe. I think he walked in there going, if this goes the way I think it's going to go, I'm going to say things for a European audience to make sure that I can do everything I can to get the aid to continue from Europe and have it increase. But Ravi, you had another clip to react to too, I think.
Yeah, we had the second half of this exchange, but I'm going to actually skip that because I think we get the gist. It got more hostile from there. I imagine most people have seen it, and Vance really started to lecture Zelensky and basically implied that Zelensky was being disrespectful, and people have seen that, and we could speculate as to what's going on there. But I think the next step of this was Vance then going on Hannity and I think turning some heads across the pond. Let's go to this clip.
And here's the thing, when you would talk to the Biden administration officials in private, it's another example of a terrible situation the Biden admin left the Trump administration. When you ask them, what's the plan? Okay, we're going to spend tens of billions of dollars, hundreds of billions of dollars in Ukraine. What is your plan? And they would honestly tell you, well, we're just going to send them weapons for as long as we can and hope eventually they can turn the tide. Hope is not a strategy. Throwing money and ammunition at a terrible conflict, that is not a strategy. The only guy in town with a strategy is the President of the United States, and everybody needs to follow his lead.
What scares me is Zelensky, when he says it's going to go on for years, how many more lives are going to be lost? He's not going to have a country to save at the end of that. The minerals deal would have provided the monies to rebuild their country and a strong U.S. presence and maybe European troops as well.
And this is an important part of it. The president knows that, look, if you want real security guarantees, if you want to actually ensure that Vladimir Putin does not invade Ukraine again, the very best security guarantee is to give Americans economic upside in the future of Ukraine. That is a way better security guarantee than 20,000 troops from some random country that hasn't fought a war in 30 or 40 years. The security guarantee and also the economic guarantee for Ukraine is to rebuild the country and ensure that America has a long-term interest. You're not going to do that if you come to the Oval Office, insult the president, and refuse to follow his plan for peace.
We talk about insulting, and I want to hear it. You guys are veterans, and so I'm going to tee you up here. Hasn't fought a war in 30 or 40 years, right? So the British troops who we're talking about here, like it's really Britain and France who are leading the way here in supporting Ukraine. British troops fought alongside Americans in Afghanistan with Vance in Iraq for the entirety of those wars. 457 British troops lost their lives in Afghanistan, 179 in Iraq. France didn't join the Iraq war, but it sent 70,000 troops to Afghanistan over 13 years, 89 of whom were killed. And most recently, both countries, including others in Europe, sent in Navy and other troops to help us with the Yemen conflict. So this is, I mean, disgraceful.
Yeah. I mean, Kurt, you want to talk? You go ahead. I have thoughts. Go ahead. You're the
guest.
You
know, first of all, the two people, you know, the Fox News analyst, not really a news guy, but Fox News analyst, and Vice President Vance, you know, Hannity made the point, you know, how many more people are going to have to die? They don't care. I frankly do not believe that in their heart of hearts, they care about the Ukrainian people that I've met. I mean, Vice President Vance has never even been to Ukraine. Like, I don't think they personally care about any of those people. And if the president of the country, much like the prime minister of Great Britain in World War II, said we will, you know, fight on the beaches, we'll fight, right? The whole, like, we're not going to give up. You're not going to get us to give up. Is committed, then we all should be committed too. I mean, it's a democracy. But and oh, by the way, nobody wants to make the point that Russia lost 3 years ago. They lost. Had they taken the whole country, it would be a different story. Now they're just in a slog it out, and they're losing people, just like the Ukrainians are losing people, and they've lost. Like, they are in a position now of, uh-oh, what did we do? And here's the problem: we're giving them an out. Our president is throwing a lifeline. It's like phoning a friend and giving a lifeline to those cast of characters in the Kremlin. And I just believe, for what reason? I mean, I believe that, but I don't know for what reason. It's a new world order, clearly. We have, you know, NATO that's sort of fractured at this point because we're the, you know, the big daddy and everybody else. And now everybody else is like, what's wrong? What's wrong with the leadership? What are they up to? What is going on here? I mean, people are trying to get a grip and a handle on what's actually happening here. I don't know, and it's going to take me a minute to wrap my head around it. I mean, I was in Germany in the 80s in the Fulda Gap in the middle of the winter, freezing my feet off, going, "What am I doing here?" But I understood on the other side of that line were, you know, East German, Czechoslovakian, and Soviet soldiers, and so I kind of got it. And that was 3 years of that. And so now I'm like, what are we doing? How did we get here?
Well,
you know, how do we somehow side with that bucket full of knuckleheads over there? I don't get it. Like, I think I'm going through it, and I'll come up with an answer. I mean,
well, let me give you one, Kurt. Let me give you one. Let's go back, because I think there's a cynicism at the heart of what's going on here. And let's, Jeremy, play the first half of that clip you just played again, and I'll just tell you when to stop.
And here's the thing, you know, when you would talk to the Biden administration officials in private, it's another example of a terrible situation the Biden admin left the Trump administration. When you ask them, what's the plan? Okay, we're going to spend tens of billions of dollars, hundreds of billions of dollars in Ukraine. What is your plan? And they would honestly tell you, well, we're just going to send them weapons for as long as we can and hope eventually they can turn the tide. Hope is not a strategy. Throwing money and ammunition at a terrible conflict, that is not a strategy. The only guy in town with a strategy is the President of the United States, and everybody needs to follow his lead.
What scares me is Zelensky, when he says it's going to go on for years, how many more lives are going to be lost? He's not going to have a country to save at the end of that. The minerals deal would have provided the monies to rebuild their country and a strong U.S. presence and maybe European troops as well.
And this is an important part of it. The president knows that, look, if you want real security guarantees, if you want to actually ensure that Vladimir Putin does not invade Ukraine again, the very best security guarantee is to give Americans economic upside in the future of Ukraine. That is a way.
That's what I wanted to get. Am I crazy, or is that JD Vance being like, if they just had oil, we'd care?
Well, and let's point out the obvious here, which is if Putin completely takes over Ukraine, given the relationship between Putin and Trump, and everything we know about Trump, what's to say he wouldn't just cut the same deal and renege on the deal that he had with Ukraine and just cut the same deal with Putin, maybe even with more
100%.
favorable terms?
They look at the map and they don't see human beings outside of the United States of America. And to be quite honest, they don't see human beings oftentimes inside the blue parts of the United States of America. And they say, okay, there's no human beings there. What do they have? They have minerals. And so imagine, like, it's not just as simple as we don't care about Ukraine because it doesn't have strategic economic value to the United States. It is like, hey, we are screwing Ukraine. That's what we're doing. We don't care. If you want future administrations to not screw Ukraine, then you got to let us do our thing so that Ukraine has strategic value to the United States. They're basically like, if you want to save Ukraine from us, you got to let us pillage Ukraine. Otherwise, Ukraine won't matter, which is such an amazing, cynical, backwards way to say that you're going to protect Ukraine.
Well, and I've heard a little bit of this on the news and the internet. You know, that's new. That's
a brand new. Yeah.
Because had that been the strategy in Doha, they wouldn't have left Afghanistan. Right. Because Afghanistan has more of all of those things that they want out of this mineral deal than Ukraine, and probably 3/4 of that part of the globe put together.
Yeah, so, I think this is just an excuse for the mineral grab.
It's a racket. It's an excuse, and because again, if that had been the strategy back then, we'd have left our 3,000 troops inside of Afghanistan. We would have done the logistics support to the Afghan army. We would have done the close air support. We could have done that for an awfully long time. We've been in Korea. I've been stationed there. We've been there since the 50s. We haven't left. We're in Japan still. We're in Germany still, right? It just takes time. It just takes time. And we as a nation, in our citizenry, I get it, you run out of patience, but over time you forget. Like you forget we have people in Japan. You still probably forget we have people in Korea. If I told most Americans, hey, we still got a bunch of troops in Korea, they'd be like,
a lot.
Really? Yeah. And it's really cold there, and it's really hot there, and everything in between.
And well, and also the
point, these things that we have to, the long view. We don't have the long view. This is very short-sighted. I mean, all about something that I have quite yet to put my finger on. But I'll get there.
And it's also, the point is also that you spend the money now in Ukraine so that you don't have to send the troops. But you've spent time, I mean, to wrap this up, you've spent time on the ground in your work with American Rescue Project with Ukrainians who are fighting, with Ukrainian civilians. Talk about what you've seen and talk about what American Rescue Project continues to do there.
Yeah, sure. So what I saw was a united population, probably far more united than ours, that have more morale than I really would have imagined. Like you think, oh, you're going to come and there's going to, no, like they are committed and they are ready to go. They're like, this is Ukraine. We are Ukrainians. One of the things that I found interesting was many of them, a lot of them didn't speak Ukrainian. They spoke Russian.
Right.
But by the time I got there, which was in the first time was May of 23, I think. Well, they weren't speaking Russian, and it was like not outlawed, but I mean almost, right? I mean it was like that was just not acceptable. You need to speak Ukrainian. So, but they are totally united. They are mobilized in a way that was in the short period of time was amazing. So they have these organizations like we coupled with the Swedish government, the MSB out of the Swedish government, and they have these organizations, nonprofits / NGOs, you could call them. They're not the Red Cross or whatever, but similar, smaller. And we partnered with one, TACMed North, They started with like 3 people, a bunch of guys that were teaching, first aid to people that they would take out in the woods on hiking trips before the war, before the full scale war in 2022. And they're like, well, we have the skill set of like EMT essentially. We need to be able to train. So the Swedes brought them to Stockholm. They gave them a bunch of training. They brought them all back. And then they started training their trainers. And they ended up with about 120 trainers. And we've been purchasing for them out of North American Rescue, which is an American company here in South Carolina. All of the tourniquets, all of the chest seals, and so on and so forth that go into an individual first aid kit or buddy aid kit. We've been purchasing those over the last almost 3 years. The hard part is continuing. It's not on the front page anymore, so donations kind of go away, and you kind of have to go out and find other folks and other donors. But we've had a couple of really amazing people that have kind of hung in there with us over the years. And IFACs aren't cheap; they're about $80 a pop. So we've sent millions and millions of dollars worth of them downrange, and in fact, the last shipment just arrived last Friday. In fact, and I'm hoping it's not the last shipment, because I don't know that this thing's over anytime soon. So I've seen a self-synchronization of these organizations, which is pretty amazing. And we're working with, and we have worked with EOD, explosive, unexploded ordnance organizations. Bomb Techs Without Borders is one of them. We've given them some grants, and and we've been boots on the ground with them with some folks. We've given them some IFACs when they needed them because we could. But at the end of the day, we do know this, right? One thing we really want to get involved in is unexploded ordnance, humanitarian demining kind of stuff. USAID was involved in that. Mm-hmm. State Department was involved in that, and now they're not. They just, they pulled the pins on all of that. So somebody has to step into the breach and get that done. Why not us? We kind of have an experience with that. I've got an intimate experience with that in Afghanistan. Those things were just laying on the ground when I got there in 2002, all over the place. And I saw the results. And I do know this, right? So we're trying to raise money for that for sure. I do know this one thing. I do know one thing, that the last victim of this war is yet to be born. That's how serious unexploded ordnance on a battlefield is. Right? It was your backyard, it was your playground, it was your whatever, and next thing you know, you're back. And let's just say the war ended tomorrow. Things will just still go boom in the night or in the day. And the Russians are pretty sinister about just laying them everywhere and not even mapping out where they put them. So you have no idea. So those are 2 things we're really involved with intimately. We've been involved with the evacuation of U.S. Personnel that joined the Foreign Legion, I guess. I can't remember exactly what they called it, but wounded, got them out through Landstuhl. Now we have a process for that because of ourselves and a couple of other organizations that got together, and we sort of figured out how to get people out and through and evac and get them into Landstuhl as American citizens. Landstuhl is a U.S. military hospital there in Germany. So we continue to fight with our brothers and sisters on the ground in Ukraine. They need all the support they can get because, as I said, we've stopped all military aid, but there was a lot of other types of aid going in, like medical assistance, food assistance. They didn't just drop dollars on them. Like, I think that's a lie that's being told. Most of the military aid was basically used to buy 155 shells right here in U.S. of A. So there's some guy somewhere making 155 shells has a job because they're shipping them to Ukraine. So those monies weren't really sent over there. But some monies were, but not a lot. Mostly it was goods and other people coming into the country. But I will say this: the other thing I did see was that the European Union, the Swedes that we've worked with in particular, and many others are, the one, they're at a crossroads, but 2, they're totally committed. They're like, they see themselves as next, I think. Right. So,
yeah. This is. That's a good place to end because the war is not ending just because we're switching sides. No. We're just switching to the bad guys, and the war will continue. And well, Kurt, I really appreciate you coming on and talking about it. I appreciate that. They told the story of the first ARP adventure on 60 Minutes, so I got all this credit for it. But as you well know, since that, you've been leading American Rescue Project. You're the one who took the lead in getting another 1,600 people out of Afghanistan, helping them get resettled across the country, doing the work that we're now doing in Ukraine and other places around the world. And it's really important. And so for folks who are listening, who, regardless of what the American government does, still wants to see Americans supporting Ukraine, they can support the work that ARP is doing, led by Kurt, at theamericanrescueproject.org. It's theamericanrescueproject.org. We will also put that in the comment here or in the show description on audio and here on YouTube. And we would, encourage people to go and make a donation. And Kurt, I really appreciate your leadership, and I appreciate you coming on and talking about it.
Well, thanks for having me, both of you. I was watching the show before I got on, so I was a little bit fired up. So
good.
Hopefully, I wasn't too fired up. But
you're perfect.
But I'm absolutely ecstatic to have joined you today, and Slava Ukraine, right? So let's keep them protected and safe over there. I mean, they're fighting on our behalf, essentially, right? Yep. As we look at how appeasement goes, so not very well mostly. All right, but thank you guys for having me.
Thanks, Kurt. Thanks for joining us. All right, Ravi, before we talk about what's going on in our lives, you're still in New Orleans, we should remind people that if they want to hear us talk about the politics of something lighter, they can tune in on Valor Media Network every Tuesday at 3:30 Central when we stream our show, The Game Within, which is all about the politics and business of sports. We've been doing it lately and having a lot of fun talking about some of the same topics we talk about here, but a lot of how they affect sports and how sports affects the rest of this. So I've been enjoying that a lot, and I know you have too.
Absolutely. And I know that we're running over, so I'll just be quick about what's happening in my world. I'm in New Orleans. It was Mardi Gras yesterday. Mardi Gras is kind of like a 2-month affair around here, so it was really the wrapping up of that process. And I've been here for Mardi Gras before. This is a weird experience because I've been working the whole time, and I had the experience yesterday morning. They moved Mardi Gras earlier because it was supposed to rain. And I'm sitting at this coffee, and my apartment is in the French Quarter, and I have this this experience of going to the coffee shop that opens at 6 a.m. And everybody in the coffee shop has clearly been up since the night before because the parade's like starting at some ungodly hour, and everybody's in like crazy costumes. And this guy, if you've seen this SNL More Cowbell skit, this guy's dressed like Will Ferrell from the More Cowbell skit with his stomach hanging out and big hair. And he's just banging his cowbell right in my ear as I'm like answering emails and like preparing for my day. And as you know, you were recording something yesterday. It's like marching bands going by my apartment every day. And I rent an office here, but the office was closed. So I had to record from the middle of the French Quarter yesterday during Mardi Gras. It's been quite an experience. Not how it was intended, as they say.
No, but that's awesome. You're having a very genuine square experience in New Orleans.
Yes.
That's awesome. Well, all right. Thanks, everybody, for listening. Again, if you want to support American Rescue Project, and I hope you do, you can go to theamericanrescueproject.org. Thanks to Kurt Warner for joining us. You can find myself at Jason Kander on social. You can find Ravi at Ravi M. Gupta. Please leave a 5-star review. Thank you to the Midas Mighty. And remember, we all have a platform. Make sure to use yours today.